All right, let's say our La'asok B'divrei Torah blessing together. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kitanu V'mitzvotav V'tzivanu La'asok B'divrei Torah. Praise to you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has made us holy with your commandments and commanded us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. So, Midrash on one foot. So, a Midrash is when rabbis and others take biblical texts and interpret them. It comes from the root Dalad Resh Shin, meaning inquiry, and it's related to the words Beit Midrash, house of study, and drasha, which is a sermon. A Midrash can be one sentence long or an entire novel/movie. Classical Midrashim are found in classical collections in the Talmud, but anybody can make one today as long as it doesn't contradict the plain meaning of the biblical text. A little bit more, and then we'll get to questions. How did Midrash come to be? After the Jews got into the land of Israel, they had many discussions about how to implement the words of the Torah, like, what does it mean when it says, make a sukkah? What does that look like? When the temple was destroyed in 70 CE, these discussions continued in Yavne, sometimes with rabbis teaching small groups of students, such as when the Romans were persecuting them, and sometimes with rabbis teaching and discussing with larger groups. Each rabbi would orally pass on what they remembered and what they had been taught by their teachers. Some of the time was also spent discussing the Torah and trying to derive meaning from it through making connections. This became Midrash. The rabbis of this time were known as Tanaim. All right, so then what kinds of Midrash are there? If the Mishnah explained the how of the Torah, and Rashi, as a commentator, explained the what of the Torah, Midrash explains the so what of the Torah. Halachic Midrash seeks to explain the deeper meaning of the text, while Aggadic Midrash seeks to explain the missing parts of the stories. You can think of it as holy fanfic. For example, what did Cain and Abel talk about in their last conversation? The Torah only says that they talked, so Midrash seeks to fill in the gaps. We'll come back to that. Classical Midrashic texts were written between 200 and 1200 CE. The Mechilta covers Exodus, Sifra is about Leviticus, and Sifrei covers Numbers and Deuteronomy. The Tanchuma covers all 5 books. There's also Midrash Rabbah, with books covering each book in the Torah and each of the 5 Megillot, the 5 scrolls: Esther, Song of Songs, Ruth, Lamentations, and Ecclesiastes. Every so often in these Monday evening classes, I'll bring a text from the Mechilta, Bereshit Rabbah, things like that. So this is where this is coming from. People still write Midrashim today. All right, what questions do you have so far about Midrash, based off of what I've said so far or in general?
What do you mean by so what? Midrash explains the so what. Is that sarcastic? Or is that...
No, it's to say that Midrash tries to explain why this is important.
Okay.
Our Midrash, excuse me.
Go ahead.
Are Midrashim that are being written today compiled anywhere? Or how do we know what the current Midrashim are?
That's a fair question. So there are no collections that everybody agrees on, in the same way that there's a whole proliferation of everything in Judaism, and it's very hard to find any one source that everybody agrees on. It's like the fact that the last thing that got added to the service for almost all Jews was Kabbalat Shabbat, and that was 500 years ago. So today, someone writes a prayer, and it might spread a little bit, but it doesn't get to the entire world. So in the same way with Midrash, people write Midrashim today, and they don't necessarily go very far. So you can find books of Midrashim, sometimes written by multiple authors, sometimes by one, that have a particular focus. For instance, there are books of feminist midrashim, or midrashim about female characters in the Bible, which may or may not be exactly the same thing. There are books of midrashim for children, like I believe it's Mark Geller wrote, "Does God Have a Big Toe?" which is a modern midrash from probably the last 20 years or so, that tries to explain the Tower of Babel by saying that there was a child who wanted to know if God had a big toe. And she asked her mother, and her mother didn't know. So her mother asked someone else, who asked someone else, who asked someone else. And eventually, everybody was curious if God had a big toe. And they decided to build a tower so they could go check on whether or not God had a big toe. So that's a collection of midrashim and there are a variety of other ones also in that book. Marilyn.
Don't some midrashim contradict other midrashim?
Absolutely. Midrashim often will portray one character more sympathetically than another midrash might convey. So, for instance, Cain and Abel, which we'll come back to, you could write a midrash that says Cain saw a stone from a mountain fall from a mountain and kill a sheep, and he was really mad at Abel, so he knew that a stone would kill him, and he killed him with a stone. And you could write another midrash that says Cain had never seen anybody be killed before. He had no idea that was going to happen. He just wanted to give him a little bump on his head. So, like, you can write a midrash that gets into characters' perspectives from a variety of ways. When we discuss why a particular Bible character might have done something, we are writing midrashim all the time, or at least we're saying them. And as long as they don't contradict the plain meaning of the text, midrashim can absolutely contradict each other.
So if you're looking for truth, how do you find it? Through these myths, through this myth?
Well, given that the midrashim were all made up by somebody, it is hard to say that they are objectively historical, because we know that they all were written to describe something way after it happened, assuming it even happened in the first place. That being said, there is truth in many midrashim, even if they are not true. So if a midrash makes a point that is true, and I'm trying to think of one at the moment. All right. Why Noah chose the dove? I think Eric Carle may have written a midrash about this one, or taken a midrash that someone else wrote. But it answers, like, midrashim often try to answer questions. So Noah, we just read the story of Noah this past 2 days ago. Noah needs to go check on whether or not there's dry land, and he wants to send a bird, which makes sense. But he's got lots of birds to choose from. Why does Noah choose the dove of all the birds? So there's a common midrash that says that Noah chose the dove because all the other birds were saying, pick me, I'm the best bird, I've got this feature, I've got that feature, you should definitely pick me, Noah. And the dove was just sitting there quietly, being like, they all have other good things going for them. I'm sure one of them would make an excellent choice. Noah, you should pick somebody else. And Noah says in this midrash, because you are being humble and not self-aggrandizing yourself, I'm going to choose you. Now, is that story true? Presumably not. Nobody was there to know for sure, but presumably not. Is there truth in the story? Yes. That sometimes it is better to not be so pushy about yourself. It's a balancing act. Sometimes you do need to stand up for yourself. Like Hillel says, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? So it's a balancing act. But there is truth in that midrash, even if it's not true.
So there's a moral piece that comes out of it that helps you.
Exactly. I won't necessarily say that every midrash has a moral.
No, but that
probably many of them do.
sounds like a good example. Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions about midrashim or midrash?
But could you say that it's an elaboration of something?
Yeah, exactly. It's an elaboration.
Okay.
Sometimes it's an elaboration by making connections, and sometimes it's an elaboration by filling in holes in the story. All right.
Well, why were some things? Okay.
Yeah. Go.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I thought you.
Wait.
So why were some things accepted? And I'm sure the other folks that also developed some midrash or some commentary or an example to elaborate. And we know nothing about it because they weren't accepted into the body of the works that have come down to us. What was the criteria that something would be accepted or not? And we don't know.
I'm not sure. I can investigate. My sense is that all right, I'm not actually going to give a sense on this. I'm going to give a range of possibilities. These classical compilations bring in a number of different sources. A number of different rabbis are quoted. So it could be that everybody that they knew about made it in. And it could be at the other end of the spectrum that there were a lot more that they knew about that we don't know about that didn't make it in. And I have no way of proving one way or the other, although I'll see what I can learn.
David, if the editor of a compilation in the foreword gives you a reason why he chose them based on some kind of so-called objectivity, that could also be a midrash.
That's true. I don't know that anybody assumes that there's objectivity when it comes to midrash. I think that it may have to do with certainly with the traditions that were received. So, I mean, think about your own teachers that you've had. I'm going to make an assumption that all of you have had many teachers over your lifetime, and each of them probably told you many things. And now you probably can't remember everything that all of your teachers told you. And probably even the next year, I'm going to guess, many of you could not remember everything that your teachers from the previous year had told you. And if you had gotten together with your classmates the year after you'd been in that class, you probably could have figured out a lot of the things, but you still wouldn't remember everything that had been taught, even though you were all there together. So I'm going to assume that part of why not every midrash made it into the canon has partly to do with the transmission process. That not everything got passed down in a way that stuck. So the ones that stuck had a better chance of making it in. Does that help answer the question?
Some of the Midrash are so incredibly powerful and psychologically insightful in spaces where it says here is Midrash seeks to fill in the gaps. One of my favorites is a really long Midrash in Tanhuma Yom Denu about the death of Moses. I think it's 12 pages or something, really, really long, by Et Hanan, and it's in Midrash Devarim Rabbah as well. And it's so incredibly profound as it goes through Moses' reaction when God tells him he's going to die and not go into the land. It goes on and on about their conversation and Moses begging, and it's stunning. And I think those kinds of stories become seared into your head. I'll never read the death of Moses the same way again. It just infuses the way you think about the original text. And I think some of the Midrash are like that. You know, the Abraham and the idol story. That's not Torah, but I bet a lot of people think it is. Because it's just so effective at filling in a gap.
Rashi commentary.
Say again?
It's Rashi commentary. Rashi comments on that. Abraham and the idol. Abraham and the idol.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Rashi brings a lot of Midrashim as well when he's trying to explain things in the text. It's one of his.
But I did want to ask you, David, about authority. Building on the earlier question of how do you know what's true? I think Norma asked. There are kind of levels of authority, wouldn't you say, between Rashi, for example, or a Midrash captured in Talmud, as compared to other collections, or not so much? What do you think?
I think that there's certainly both a respect that's given and an awareness of Midrashim that come from classical collections. So Midrash Rabbah is probably better known than, say, the Tzipporah. But the Tzipporah is probably better known than something that somebody else came up with around the same time that never made it down to us. And things that are in the Talmud, Midrashim that are in the Talmud, also get a lot of authority on grounds of being in the Talmud and being studied by lots of people. Midrashim written today, because they are newer, are often considered less authoritative. It may also be that people are more aware that they were written by people. On the other hand, while anybody can write a Midrash, oftentimes people who set out to write a Midrash do so in conversation with previous Midrashim on their topic. Sometimes contemporary if they can find them, and certainly the classical Midrashim, which something like Sefaria now makes it very easy to find. You click on a verse in Sefaria and it says in the sidebar, would you like to see 17 Midrashim, some of which are in Hebrew only, that are on this verse. And so today it is easier to be in conversation with Midrashim on topics. I should also mention that Gary Bolenke has written many Midrashim, contemporary Midrashim. I haven't asked him, but I assume that he is also in conversation with the sources. So So yes, I would agree that there's a hierarchy of authority. And at the same time, I would also say that someone who wants to engage in the conversation shouldn't feel like they have nothing to say in the presence of the room when Bereshit Rabbah is also in the room.
David, what was it also maybe like a prophecy too?
It is said that prophecy ceased, depending on who you ask, either at the end of the first temple or at the end of the Bible, because some of those prophets are after the first temple. It may be, depending on how one thinks of prophecy, that somebody who comes up with a midrash might be struck with inspiration and might attribute it to God, in the same way that people who write other things get ideas from all over the place, and perhaps some of them might also think that God had something to do with it. But I'm not going to say that midrashic authors are considered prophets in the biblical sense of the term. But it's a reasonable question.
David, I also have a question regarding the authority of midrashim.
Yeah.
Are halachic midrashim, in terms of their impact, I don't know if necessarily is the right word, but are they more authoritative than non-halachic or legal like midrash? Like would the Tzipporah be more authoritative in the sense of its impact than say Bereshit Rabbah?
Yeah. So I think it depends on what the impact is in. Like the Tzipporah as a halachic midrash might have impact on how you think about something, whereas the Agadic midrash, like Bereshit Rabbah, might have impact on how you feel about something. Stories often work on the level of emotion, while halacha often works on the level of the intellect, which isn't to say that they can't both work on the other level as well, but I would say that they are differently impactful and authoritative in that way.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, what else? All right. Let's move on then. Seeing no other questions. So we're going to start with halachic midrash, which is commenting on biblical verses, but not as stories. So we have here from Exodus chapter 13, verse 14, when in the time to come, a child of yours asks you, saying, what does this mean? You shall reply, it was with a mighty hand that Adonai brought us out from Egypt, the house of bondage. This comes from the biblical book of Exodus, right as the Israelites are leaving Egypt. So now let's see what the Mechilta does with this. All right. So the Mechilta cites this verse, and it shall be if your son asks you tomorrow. And now they start playing with the word tomorrow. What does tomorrow mean? Because midrashim are trying to answer questions. Tomorrow might mean in the present, and it might mean in time to come. And now the Mechilta is going to give examples to show the same word, machar, in different places and how it might have different meanings in those places and what impact that might have on this place. So for instance, there is a verse in Exodus, tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill. That is in the present, like in 24 hours. That's from the fight against Amalek. Whereas in the book of Joshua, it says, tomorrow your children might say to our children, and that is much further to come. And now, there's another place where the Torah uses the word machar, tomorrow. If your son asks you tomorrow, i.e. in the time to come, what are the testimonies and the statutes, etc.? So, now that we have commented on this verse with the one word tomorrow and tried to figure out what it means based off of different places where the word shows up, now we're going to go and take this a step further. And we get the beginning of the 4 children. All right. What questions do you have about how this game works? This is an example of halachic midrash.
Leave no stone unturned, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
each layer has a layer beneath it, and you have to keep. Well, I guess this is looking for truth to me. It's just digging and digging until maybe something rings the bell for you.
Yeah. In a time when there was no Facebook to distract people, they knew the Bible much better than most of us. And also there were fewer books in general 1,500 years ago or more. And so when you hear a word in one place, it's like the term is gezerah shava, which is effectively chutes and ladders. If you hear it, if word A means X here, and you have word A over there, does it mean X over there as well? And if it doesn't, maybe that's because it meant Y in a third place. So yes, it's all about the hyperlinking and figuring out, as you said, I guess, truth based off of what it means from different places and how you can make connections and meaning from that.
I have a question also regarding this system, especially in the halachic or legal context. Can these midrashim, are they limited to like the pshat, the drash, the remez, like the 3 sort of the first 3 layers of Torah interpretation, or can they appeal to the mystical when they're trying to derive like legal sort of stuff, or is the mystical side of interpretation kind of out of this area?
Yeah. So Gabriel's referring to what's called the Pardes system of interpretation, which assumes that text is like a multi-layer cake, and there are multiple layers that exist all at the same time. And so the top layer is the pshat, the simple literal meaning of the text. And then underneath that is the remes, which is the allegory, the things that are hinted at. And then you've got the drash, which is the so what, and then you've got the sod, which is the mystical secret layer. So Midrash mostly works on the drash level because it's got the same root as drash and midrash. But sometimes it goes into the other layers as well. And certainly it has to spend a lot of time with the pshat, the simple literal meaning of the text, because a Midrash is much stronger if it doesn't contradict the literal meaning of the text.
David, many times when I've studied Torah with rabbis and other people, I keep hearing that the Torah is not necessarily chronological. Here you are talking about two tenses, the present and the future, omitting that any of these could be referring to the past, but these are essentially taken out of context. So couldn't they in some ways refer to the past rather than to the present or future at times?
I think that Midrash certainly is looking at words where they appear. In this particular instance, they're commenting on the word tomorrow, machar. So they are reading these verses as being either about the immediate future or the not so immediate future. Generally, the word tomorrow does not refer to yesterday. So in this case, I don't know that these verses, even in context or particularly in context, would refer to the past. One can try to make them refer to the past. I'm sure that there are people who have either done that or have been certainly willing to if they felt like they needed to. But on the pshat, the simple literal meaning of the text, that's not something that would happen. But yes, playing with time is something that sometimes does happen, depending on this situation that's being discussed. Does that help?
I think it does, but I can probably come up with scenarios where tomorrow could refer to something of the past as well. Such as last Friday, my son told me that tomorrow there was going to be a basketball game. And would I please be there? And I didn't go. That's in the past.
That's true. That is true.
It's a stretch.
Yes. All right. Let's look at something else. Let's talk about Agadic Midrash. So Agadic Midrash is Midrash that tries to fill in the gaps in biblical stories. So here we have, again, something that we just happened to have read last week. And then we're going to go into something that we're about to read this coming week. This is the line of Terach. Terach begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran begot Lot. Haran died in the lifetime of his father Terach in his native land, or of the Chaldeans. Abram and Nahor took wives for themselves, the name of Abram's wife being Sarai, and that of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren, she had no child. Terach took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and they settled together from the Ur of the Chaldeans for the land of Canaan. But when they had come as far as Haran, they settled there. The days of Terach came to 205 years, and Terach died in Haran. Adonai said to Abram, "Go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and curse the one who curses you, and all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you." Abram went forth as Adonai had commanded him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. So this is from the biblical book of Genesis. It's where we first meet Abraham, still called Abram at the time. If we had more time, I would ask you what questions you would make about the text, or you would ask what questions you would want to answer. But since we don't, I will point out that a question that people have wondered, looking at this exact set of text, is why Abram? Why is God talking to Abram of all the many people that are alive in the world at that time? Why Abram? Now, the Torah doesn't give us an answer, which means that it is wide open for coming up with midrashim about this. And if we had more time, I'd have you come up with a midrash, but we don't. So I'm just going to give you one. All right, so this is Sefer HaYashar, which is a book of Midrash, trying to answer this question. And rather than read it to you, I will summarize it as I go, and then you can read the full text on your own. So, Terach says to Abram, my son, look, these are the things, the idols in his house, these are the things that have created everything you see in the world, and also you and me. And Terach bows down before all of his gods, and he leaves, and he takes Abram with him. And the part that I didn't know until I found this original text, in the original version of the story, Abram says to his mother, kind of reminiscent of Jacob and Rebekah, Mom, Dad has shown me everything that created the heavens and the earth and all the people. Now please, take a sheep, make some stew, so I can give it as an offering to the gods of my father, because hopefully they will think kindly of them. And his mother makes a stew from a goat, and she gives it to Abram, and Abram gives it to the gods and invites them to eat. But there's no sound, there's no motion, none of the idols start trying to eat it. And Terach has no idea what Abram's doing. And Abram sits and watches, and he sees that nobody's moving. He's like, okay, maybe I didn't bring enough. Maybe it's not what they like. Tomorrow, I'll come back with more, better meat. So the next day, Abram asks his mom to make more, better meat. And he brings it back, and he gives everybody their own dish, so nobody has to argue about it. And he sits there the whole day and watches them, but nobody moves, nobody eats. And then the Spirit of God comes over Abram that evening, and he says, Oy vey to my parents and everybody in this generation who are worshiping things that can't do nothing. They have a mouth but can't speak, eyes and cannot see, ears and cannot hear, hands and cannot grasp, feet and cannot walk, which I'm pretty sure is a quote from Isaiah. So, and everybody who bows down to them, may they be just like these gods. And then he gets very upset at his parents, at his father. He takes an axe and he breaks all of the idols except for the largest one, and he puts the axe in the hands of the largest one, and then he leaves. Next, Terach hears a big commotion. So he comes and he sees, and he goes to where the idols are, and he meets Abram just coming out of it. And Terach goes in and he sees everything's shattered except for the largest one has an axe, and all of them have meat offerings. So Terach gets really upset and he goes to Abram. He says, what is it that you did to my gods? And Abram says, look, don't get so upset, Dad. It wasn't me. I brought meat for all of them, and each god decided that he was going to eat, and they decided to eat before the largest god could take some for himself. And when the largest god saw that all of them were so rude, then he got very upset, and he went and he took the axe from the house and he broke them all down. And look, you can see the axe in his hands now. And Terach gets furious and he says, what are you saying? Why are you lying to me? Do you want me to believe that these things happen when I know that they have no strength with them? I know that they are just wood and stone that I've shaped into images. And now you're trying to tell me this narishkeit, this nonsense. And then Abram says, look, if you know all this, how can you worship these idols that have no strength and no power to do anything? Can they save you in your hour of danger? Can they hear your prayers when you call on them? Can they deliver you from the hands of your enemies or fight your battles for you? You are worshiping idols of wood and stone, which can neither hear nor speak. So, that is one answer as to why God chose Abram or Abraham.
David, I think Abraham made a big mistake.
Yes.
Instead of cooking the meat ahead of time, he was supposed to sacrifice the lamb to the gods and then cook the meat. And that's why they rejected it.
That's why they didn't eat.
That could be. They felt like his offering had no merit. Absolutely a possibility.
Another
Do an appendix, guys.
Yes, modern midrashim upon midrashim. We have the world's newest midrashim, Midrash.
another blog post.
Yes. All right. So midrashim can be in the Talmud, but first a video which I'm not going to show you about Disney Midrash. So Disney Midrash tries to make connections between the world of Disney movies. For instance, in Frozen, there's a ship that ends up sinking somewhere. And in The Little Mermaid, a ship comes from somewhere and it sank. And Disney Midrash says, it must be the same ship. And then it spins a whole world within it makes all these connections within the world of Disney. So you can watch that on your own, but now we're going to see the same sort of Midrash happen in the Talmud. So in Masechet Shabbat, which is about Shabbat, as you might guess, they're talking about things you can't do on Shabbat, including gathering wood on Shabbat, which is one of the few things the Torah itself actually says not to do on Shabbat. The rest the rabbis come up with. And the Torah has a story where it says that there was a guy who gathered wood on Shabbat and he wasn't supposed to, and so he got killed. And then someone brings a Baraita, which is a text from the time of the Mishnah that didn't make it into the Mishnah. It's like when you're making hamantashen and you roll out the dough and you make the circles, and then you have the leftover dough. The leftover dough are the Baraitas. They don't make it into the Mishnah's hamantashen, but they do make it into the Gemara. So there's a Baraita that says that the wood gatherer, who doesn't have a name, was actually Sovchad. And why do we think this? Because in one place it says that the children of Israel were in the desert and they found a man gathering wood on the day of Shabbat. And later on it says, our father died in the desert and he died for his own sin. So we've got an unnamed man who dies for a specific sin, and we've got a named man who dies for an unspecified sin. So therefore they must be the same person, according to Rabbi Akiva. So that is an example of Talmudic Midrash trying to make sense of the Torah. All right.
Your turn.
Your turn, if we had more time. What I've brought here is the story of Cain and Abel. All right, so in short, Adam and Eve have two sons. One is Cain, one is Abel. Abel becomes a shepherd, Cain becomes a farmer. This may be related to the disputes between farmers who like plots of land that cannot be trampled on, and shepherds who like to have the sheep go wherever. A issue that goes all the way from Cain and Abel down to the play Oklahoma. So here they both offer a sacrifice to God. Cain gives God some meager, like leftover vegetables that he doesn't really want, and Abel brings the best of what he's got. And God takes Abel's sacrifice, but not Cain's. And God says, like, why are you so upset? If you do right, things are good for you. Make better choices next time. And then, verse 8, Cain said to his brother Abel, ... And when they were in the field, Cain set upon his brother Abel and killed him. That's verse 8. So the question is, what did Cain say to Abel? If we had more time, I'd have you come up with some answers. It's a 2,000-year-old conversation, so you could come up with you could be part of the conversation. I still encourage you to think about it and email me what you think. Then I give you some classical midrashim with the caveat that your answers are also valid as long as they don't contradict the plain meaning of the text. These are just older. So there are other people's thoughts on the matter as well, usually bringing in other verses to support them. All right, here's another midrash. So midrashim often pick up on language, make connections between texts. So there's a midrash from Dvarim Rabbah that talks about the Shema, and it plays with the language Shema Yisrael, listen Israel. And it recognizes the fact that Israel does not just mean the Jewish people, like in the context where this verse comes in Deuteronomy, but it's also the name of Jacob. Jacob gets his name changed to Israel when he wrestles with an angel. And so in this midrash, Jacob is worried that maybe his children won't be faithful to God after he dies. And he gathers them around on his deathbed, gives them the blessings, and then expresses this concern. And they say, Shema Yisrael, listen Israel, meaning dad, Jacob, Adonai Eloheinu, the Lord is our God, Adonai Echad, and there's only one God. And Jacob's response is Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto Olam V'ed. Blessed be the glorious name of God's sovereignty forever. And so that is a story that plays on the connection between Yisrael as the Jewish people and Yisrael Jacob, and tries to spin the meaning of the prayer in a different way. If we had more time, we'd talk about what ways it's spinning it. All right, very quickly, modern midrashim. So, the Prince of Egypt, 1998 midrash, cinematic midrash, about this Exodus story. And in this, and I'm bringing you a clip here where we see a midrash about how Moses and Tzipporah's relationship might have unfolded. The text doesn't tell us anything. So there's a lot of room to imagine, and this imagines. And then there's another midrash from this year by Gary Blanke, which also imagines how the text how the relationship between Moses and Tzipporah might have unfolded. And you can read it because I know I'm going way too fast in light of the time. So you'll read it when I send it to you. And finally, one last historical midrash, which is the movie Hamilton, or the play Hamilton. This is a clip imagining how King George III might have reacted to the news that George Washington was stepping down from power. And so there is a midrash about that, a historical midrash. And finally, in the appendix, we've got the complete Abrahams and the Idols midrash, which goes on for way longer than I just gave you. It goes into all sorts of other things. Very interesting. I highly encourage that you read it. So